The phone call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. My Aunt Veronica's voice was shaking, desperate, almost unrecognizable through the static. "Riley, I know we haven't talked much, but please, Damien's been arrested. They're saying he could get 20 years. I don't know what to do. Can you maybe ask around at that little courthouse job of yours? See if anyone knows a good lawyer?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What my family didn't know as they sat in their panic that night was that I wasn't going to ask around. I wasn't going to make phone calls or beg favors from attorneys, because for the past 3 years, I had been the one making the decisions about cases exactly like Damien's. I was District Attorney Riley Hartwell of Millbrook County, and my cousin's fate was quite literally in my hands. My name is Riley Hartwell, and this is the story of how my family spent 15 years mocking my dead-end government job, only to discover during their darkest hour that the woman they'd dismissed as a failure was the most powerful prosecutor in 3 counties. It started the day I graduated law school from Riverside State University. Not Harvard, not Yale, just a respectable state school with a solid program and manageable debt. I remember walking across that stage in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, thinking my family would finally see me differently, finally understand that all those years of studying while they partied, all those nights I spent in the library while they called me antisocial, had led somewhere meaningful. Instead, Uncle Raymond clapped me on the back at the graduation dinner and said, "Well, at least government work is stable. Not exciting, but you'll always have a paycheck." My mother, Patricia, nodded along and added, "It's perfect for Riley. She was never ambitious like Victoria anyway." Victoria, being my younger sister, who'd just started as a marketing assistant at some tech startup. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of family gatherings where they'd ask about my little courthouse job with barely concealed pity. 15 years of watching them celebrate Victoria's promotions at Zenith Marketing while trading my career like a consolation prize. 15 years of listening to my father, Harold, tell anyone who'd listen that Riley chose the safe route, but Victoria, she's the real go-getter in the family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The irony was suffocating. While they were dismissing my safe government job, I was prosecuting organized crime cases, putting away murderers, and building a reputation that had other counties trying to poach me. While they pitied my boring desk work, I was standing in courtrooms arguing cases that made front-page news in 3 different cities. While they worried about my limited career prospects, I was being courted by the state attorney general's office and federal prosecutor positions. But I never corrected them, never set the record straight. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I was just tired of having to prove myself to people who should have believed in me from the start. The family dynamics became predictable, almost ritualistic in their cruelty. Every Christmas, every Easter, every birthday gathering, the same conversations would unfold like a script none of us could escape. "Riley, honey, are you still doing that clerk thing at the courthouse?" Aunt Veronica would ask, her voice carrying that tone people use when they're trying to sound interested but really just feel sorry for you. "She's not a clerk, she's a prosecutor," my mother would correct, but in a way that made it sound like she was defending a child who insisted on calling themselves a dinosaur. Then cousin Damien would chime in, with his economics degree and his job at Henderson Financial. "Government work is so limiting, Riley. Have you thought about transitioning to corporate? I could probably get you an interview at my firm, start you off in compliance or something." Entry level. I'd be grinding my teeth while Damien, who made his money helping rich people hide assets from their ex-wives, talked about getting me an entry-level position. This from someone whose biggest legal challenge was probably jaywalking. My sister Victoria was the worst, though. She'd perfected this art of backhanded concern that could slice through steel. "I just worry about Riley. She's so smart, but she's stuck in this dead-end job where there's no room for growth. I mean, what's the highest she can go? Assistant prosecutor? It's just sad. The highest she can go. as if district attorney was some unattainable fantasy instead of the office I'd been running for 3 years. Last Thanksgiving crystallized everything for me. We were gathered at my parents' house in Maple Grove, the same colonial where I'd grown up, where my mother still kept my high school honor roll certificates tucked away in a drawer like shameful secrets. The dining room table was set with the good china, and the conversation had inevitably turned to careers. Victoria had just gotten promoted to senior marketing director at Zenith. She was holding court describing her new corner office and her team of 12 direct reports, while everyone nodded and asked impressed questions. The attention she commanded was magnetic. This was her moment, her stage. "And they're sending me to Amsterdam for the European product launch," she was saying, swirling her wine like she was in a commercial. "3 weeks, all expenses paid. The CEO specifically requested me for the international expansion team."
"That's incredible, Victoria. You've really made something of yourself," he said, and those words hit me like a physical blow. Made something of herself, as if success was measured purely in corner offices and international travel. Then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, Victoria turned to me with that practiced smile of hers. "Riley, you're so quiet tonight. How are things at the courthouse?" She said courthouse, a way some people say sewage treatment plant. "Fine," I replied, cutting my turkey into precise, angry little pieces. "Still prosecuting traffic tickets and parking violations?" Damien added with a laugh. "Someone's got to keep Millbrook streets safe from expired meters, right?" The table erupted in polite laughter. Traffic tickets, parking violations. If they only knew that the week before, I'd secured a conviction against a human trafficking ring that had been operating across 4 counties. If they only knew that the parking violations I was handling included a RICO case against the largest money laundering operation in the state's history. But instead of defending myself, instead of setting them straight, I just smiled and said, "Something like that." My mother reached over and patted my hand in that condescending way that made my skin crawl. "Riley has always been our steady one. Not flashy like Victoria, but reliable. There's value in that, too. Reliable, not flashy, like I was a Honda Civic in a family of Ferraris." That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, definitive break of a bone under too much pressure. I looked around that table at all their smug faces, at their casual dismissal of 15 years of my life, and I made a decision. I stopped trying to make them understand, stopped hoping they'd ask the right questions or show genuine interest, stopped caring whether they knew the truth about what I'd accomplished. If they wanted to see me as a failure, fine. But the next time they needed something from the legal system, the next time they found themselves in trouble and looking for help, they were going to get a very unpleasant surprise. Damien Rivers was golden boy of our family, and he never let anyone forget it. 3 years older than me, he'd coasted through life on charm, connections, and just enough intelligence to convince everyone he was brilliant. Where I'd worked 2 jobs to pay for college, Damien had his tuition paid by Uncle Raymond, who owned a successful construction company in downtown Millbrook. After graduation, Damien landed at Henderson Financial, a boutique investment firm that catered to Millbrook's wealthiest residents. Within 5 years, he was driving a BMW, wearing $1,000 suits and talking about his portfolio management strategies at every family gathering. He was everything my family valued: successful, confident, financially comfortable, and, most importantly, he never had to explain what he did for a living. When people heard investment advisor, they understood immediately: money, status, success. "Damien's really found his calling," Aunt Veronica would gush. "He's helping people build wealth, secure their futures. It's such important work." Important work. While I was literally keeping murderers and rapists off the streets, Damien was helping rich people get richer, and somehow his job was the important one. But Damien had a problem, one that the family either didn't see or chose to ignore. He liked shortcuts. He liked the fast track to everything: success, money, respect, women. And in the world of high-stakes financial management, shortcuts have a way of becoming liabilities. I'd heard rumors, of course. In my position, you hear things. Whispers about aggressive investment strategies that bordered on fraud. Questions about client funds being moved in unusual ways. Reports of lifestyle inflation that didn't match declared income. But Damien was family, and despite everything, despite their treatment of me, I wasn't the type to go looking for trouble where my relatives were concerned. I figured if he was cutting corners, he was smart enough to stay within legal boundaries. I was wrong. Which brings us back to that Tuesday night phone call, the one that shattered my family's carefully constructed delusions about success and failure, about who mattered and who didn't. Aunt Veronica's voice was breaking as she explained what had happened. Federal agents had shown up at Henderson Financial that morning with search warrants. They'd seized computers, files, client records. They'd arrested 3 employees, including Damien. The charges are so serious, Riley. Securities fraud, money laundering, something about a Ponzi scheme. They're saying he stole millions from his clients. Millions! They set his bail at $200,000. We had to mortgage the house just to get him out. My aunt, who had spent 15 years pitying my career choice, was now begging me to use my little courthouse connections to help save her son. The lawyer they assigned him is just some public defender. He's going to prison, Riley. 20 years, maybe more. Please, I know you don't make much money at that job, but if you know anyone at all who might be able to help. I sat in my home office, surrounded by case files and legal briefs, listening to her desperation and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete and total clarity. My dead-end job wasn't just my career. It was my weapon. And for the first time in 15 years, I was going to use it. Aunt Veronica, I said quietly, I need you to tell me exactly what the charges are. I have the paperwork right here, she rustled through papers. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and operation of an unlicensed investment scheme resulting in losses exceeding $10 million. $10 million! My golden boy cousin had managed to steal $10 million from his clients, and now they wanted me to save him with my courthouse connections. Riley, please, I know we haven't always... we should have been more supportive of your career, but your family, you're the only one who might be able to help.
The only one who might be able to help. After 15 years of dismissal, suddenly I was their last hope. I'll see what I can do, I said, and I meant it. Just not in the way she thought. Because what Aunt Veronica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the case against Damien Rivers had been sitting on my desk for 6 months. I'd been the one overseeing the investigation. I'd been the one who'd authorized the search warrants. I'd been the one who'd approved the charges. My family thought they were asking me to save Damien. They were actually asking me to convict him. And as I sat there listening to my aunt's desperate pleas, I realized that 15 years of being underestimated had led to this moment. They'd spent so long treating me like a failure that they'd forgotten to notice when I became the most powerful person in their world. Tomorrow, I would have to make a decision that would change our family forever. I could recuse myself from the case, step aside, let someone else handle the prosecution of my own cousin. That would be the safe choice, the family-first choice. Or I could do my job. The job they'd mocked and dismissed for 15 years. The job that had made me the final authority on justice in Millbrook County. As I hung up the phone and looked at Damien's case files spread across my desk, I knew which choice I was going to make. And for the first time in 15 years, I smiled. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? For hours, I sat in my home office staring at the Rivers case file, watching the shadows move across the wall as car headlights swept past my window. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. My family's golden boy, the one they'd held up as the standard of success for 15 years, was facing charges that I had personally authorized. But this wasn't just about Damien anymore.
This was about a pattern of dismissal, of condescension, of being treated like the family disappointment while secretly holding more power than any of them could imagine. And now they needed that power. They just didn't know it yet. By 3 a.m., I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to recuse myself from the case. This was my jurisdiction, my responsibility, and my family was about to learn exactly what my dead-end government job actually meant. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of what Damien had done, not just the legal charges, but the human cost. Because that's what separated me from the family that had spent years belittling my work. I understood that justice isn't about personal satisfaction. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Wednesday morning, I called Detective Sergeant Olivia Pierce into my office. Olivia had been the lead investigator on the Henderson financial case, and her work was meticulous. She was one of those rare cops who understood that financial crimes weren't victimless. They destroyed families, shattered retirement dreams, and left elderly people destitute. Tell me about the victims, I said, spreading Damien's file across my conference table. Olivia's expression darkened. She'd been working this case for 18 months, and I could see the weight of it in her eyes. It's bad, Riley. Really bad. He targeted retirees mostly, people in their 60s and 70s who trusted him with their life savings. She pulled out a separate folder, thicker than the legal documents. Margaret Thorne, 73 years old, widowed. Damien convinced her to move her entire pension into his exclusive high-yield investment program. She lost $400,000. Everything she had. $400,000. I thought about my cousin's BMW, his designer suits, his frequent trips to Las Vegas that he bragged about at family gatherings, all funded by Margaret Thorne's pension. There's more, Olivia continued. David and Susan Chen, retired teachers. They gave him their entire retirement savings, $600,000, based on his promise of 12% annual returns. They're both in their 80s now, living with their daughter because they can't afford rent. The names kept coming. Retired nurses, former factory workers, small business owners who trusted their nest eggs to my charming, successful cousin. People who'd worked their entire lives only to have their security stolen by someone they trusted. How many victims total? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. 47 confirmed so far, but we think there might be more who haven't come forward yet. Total losses are estimated at $10.7 million. $10.7 million. 47 families destroyed so that Damien could maintain his lifestyle and keep up appearances at family dinners where he lectured me about career ambition. What about the Ponzi scheme structure? I asked. Olivia spread out a complex chart showing the flow of money through various accounts. Classic setup. He'd use new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors, keeping them happy and generating referrals. Meanwhile, he was siphoning off about 30% for his personal use. Fancy cars, expensive vacations, gambling debts in Atlantic City. Gambling debts. That explained the increasing desperation in the scheme's final months. Damien hadn't just been greedy, he'd been trying to cover losses from his own addictions. The really sick part is how he targeted them, Olivia added. He'd go to church socials, retirement community events, places where elderly...
First, it was my mother. Riley, honey, I know Veronica called you last night. We're all just so worried about Damien. He made a mistake, but he's family. Surely there's something you can do? A mistake? She was calling the systematic theft of $10 million from elderly people a mistake. Then my father called during my lunch break. Riley, I've been thinking about our conversation at Thanksgiving. Maybe I haven't been as supportive of your career as I should have been, but now we need your help. Family comes first, right? Family comes first. After 15 years of treating me like a second-class citizen, suddenly family loyalty was paramount. But the most manipulative call came from Victoria.
My sister had clearly been coached because her approach was different from the others. She didn't ask for help directly. Instead, she tried to make me complicit in their fantasy. Riley, I've been doing some research about these financial crime cases, she said, her voice carrying that fake concern she'd perfected. It seems like prosecutors have a lot of discretion about how aggressively they pursue charges. I mean, if this was just poor record keeping or a misunderstanding about regulations, poor record keeping, a misunderstanding about regulations, she was trying to minimize 47 counts of fraud into an accounting error. I'm not saying Damien didn't make mistakes, she continued, but destroying his life won't bring back any money. Maybe there's a way to handle this that focuses on restitution instead of punishment. Restitution. As if Damien had $10 million hidden away somewhere, ready to pay back his victims, as if justice was just an accounting problem to be solved. But the most telling part of Victoria's call was what she said at the end. I know you understand what it's like to be underestimated, Riley. Don't let them underestimate Damien, too. He's not a criminal. He's just someone who got in over his head. She was trying to create solidarity between me and Damien, as if we were both victims of a system that didn't appreciate our potential, as if stealing from elderly people was somehow equivalent to being mocked at family dinners. By Thursday, I had reviewed every piece of evidence in the Rivers case, and the picture that emerged was even worse than I had initially understood. This wasn't a crime of desperation or a single bad decision that spiraled out of control. This was systematic, calculated predation that had been going on for over 3 years. The FBI's financial analysis showed that Damien had been living far beyond his legitimate means for years. His salary at Henderson Financial was solid, but not extravagant, about $70,000 annually. Yet his spending patterns showed a lifestyle that required at least $200,000 per year. The gap was filled by stolen client funds. But the most damning evidence was in Damien's own communications. The FBI had recovered deleted emails and text messages that showed not just the scope of his fraud, but his attitude toward his victims. In one email to his girlfriend, he'd written, "These old people have more money than they know what to do with anyway. I'm practically doing them a favor by managing their portfolios more aggressively." In another message, he joked about a client's concerns. Mrs. Peterson called again asking about her investment performance. I told her the market was volatile, but her money was safe. If she only knew it paid for my weekend in Vegas. LOL. He was laughing about it, making jokes about stealing from elderly people who trusted him. But the message that hit me hardest was one he'd sent to a friend just 6 months earlier. "Family dinner this weekend. Time to listen to my cousin Riley talk about her exciting career prosecuting jaywalkers. Meanwhile, I'm pulling down $200K and she's stuck in some dead-end government job. Thank God intelligence isn't genetic. LOL. Dead-end government job." There it was, in writing, his contempt for the career that was now going to determine his fate. He'd been mocking me in private messages while stealing from innocent people, and now he expected that same career to save him. Friday morning, I did something that wasn't strictly necessary for the prosecution, but was essential for my own understanding of the case. I asked to meet with some of the victims. Margaret Thorne came to my office first. She was exactly as Olivia had described, a dignified woman in her 70s, dressed carefully in clothes that had seen better days. She carried herself with the kind of quiet strength that comes from surviving loss and disappointment, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me, District Attorney Hartwell," she said, and I noticed how she pronounced my title with careful respect. "I wanted you to know that this isn't just about money for me. It's about trust." She told me about her late husband, Robert, who'd worked 40 years as a machinist to save for their retirement, about how carefully they'd planned, how modest their lifestyle had been, also they could have security in their golden years. When Robert died 3 years ago, I was lost. I didn't know anything about investments or financial planning. Damien seemed so knowledgeable, so trustworthy. He told me he could help me make Robert's savings last longer. Instead, he'd stolen everything. The hardest part, Margaret continued, isn't even losing the money. It's knowing that I was such a fool, that someone could look me in the eye and lie so easily. It makes you question your judgment about everything. That's when I truly understood what Damien had taken from his victims. Not just money, but confidence, self-trust, the ability to feel safe in the world. David and Susan Chen told a similar story. They taught school for 35 years, living frugally, saving every penny they could for retirement. They'd met Damien at their church, where he'd given a presentation about faith-based investing that aligned with their values.
He seemed like such a nice young man, Susan said. He talked about his family, showed us pictures from family gatherings. He said he'd learned about hard work and honesty from his parents and grandparents. His family. He'd used our family as a selling point, a symbol of trustworthiness and moral values, while systematically robbing the people who believed in those values. We gave him everything because we trusted him, David added. Now we're living with our daughters, sleeping in what used to be our granddaughter's room. At our age, we should be helping our children, not being a burden on them. The shame in his voice was devastating. These were proud people who'd spent their lives contributing to their community, and Damien had reduced them to feeling like burdens. After meeting with the victims, I knew exactly what I had to do. This case wasn't about family loyalty or personal grudges. It was about justice for people who deserved better than to have their life savings stolen by someone they trusted. But I also knew that my family wasn't going to accept this easily. They still saw Damien as the golden boy who'd made a mistake, and they saw me as the family member who should be grateful for any chance to prove her worth. They were about to learn how wrong they were on both counts. I called my assistant district attorney, Marcus Donovan, into my office. Marcus was a brilliant prosecutor with a specialty in white-collar crime, and he'd been itching to take the Rivers case to trial. I want to make sure we're completely prepared for this prosecution, I told him. No stone unturned, no detail overlooked. This case needs to be airtight. Marcus grinned. You thinking they'll try to plea bargain? I'm thinking they'll try everything, I said, and I want to be ready. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Aunt Veronica back. Riley, thank goodness. Did you find anyone who can help Damien? Actually, Aunt Veronica, I need to tell you something. I've been looking into Damien's case, and there's something you should know. Oh, thank you, honey. I knew you'd come through. You're such a good girl. A good girl. Even in her desperation, she couldn't resist the condescension. Aunt Veronica, I said carefully, I am going to help with Damien's case, but probably not in the way you expect. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. 15 years of being underestimated led to this moment. I mean that I'm not just a courthouse clerk or a traffic ticket prosecutor. I'm the district attorney for Millbrook County, and Damien's case is being prosecuted by my office. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Riley, what are you saying? I'm saying that when you asked me to use my courthouse connections to help Damien, you were asking the prosecutor in charge of his case. You were asking me to help convict your son. Another long silence. But your family. You can't. You wouldn't. I'm going to do my job, Aunt Veronica. The same job you've been dismissing for 15 years. The same dead-end career you've been pitying. I'm going to make sure that the 47 people Damien robbed get justice. 47 people? Riley, you don't understand. Damien isn't a criminal. He just got confused about some regulations. He stole over $10 million from elderly people, Aunt Veronica. People who trusted him with their life savings. People like Margaret Thorne, who's now living on food stamps because of your son. This is impossible. You can't prosecute your own family. Actually, I can. And I will.
I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair. In about 10 minutes, my phone was going to start ringing nonstop. My mother, my sister, Uncle Raymond, probably even some extended family members I hadn't heard from in years. They all had the same message. This was impossible. This was a misunderstanding. This couldn't be real. But I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat in my office, watching the phone light up with incoming calls, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and absolute power over a situation that involved my family. By Friday evening, when the calls had slowed to a manageable pace, I finally picked up. It was my mother, and she'd clearly been crying. "Riley, honey, please tell me Veronica misunderstood. Please tell me you're not really going to prosecute Damien." "I'm going to prosecute the case that's on my desk, Mom, the same way I prosecute every case." "But he's family. He's your cousin. You can't send family to prison." That word again, family. The magic shield they thought would protect them from consequences, the same way they thought it would excuse 15 years of dismissing my career. "Mom, did you know that Damien stole $400,000 from a 73-year-old widow named Margaret Thorne? Did you know she's living on food stamps because of your nephew?" That's not the same thing. I'm sure Damien didn't mean. "Did you know he stole $600,000 from an elderly couple who taught school for 35 years? They're sleeping in their granddaughter's bedroom because they can't afford their own place anymore." "Riley, stop. You're being dramatic."
Dramatic? My voice was getting louder, but I didn't care. 15 years of suppressed frustration was finally finding its voice. "Mom, your nephew systematically robbed 47 elderly people. He laughed about it in text messages. He called them stupid and said they had more money than they knew what to do with. Is that dramatic enough for you?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "But what will people think?" she finally whispered. "What will people say when they find out you sent your own cousin to prison?" What will people think? Not what about the victims, not what about justice, not even what about right and wrong. What will people think about the family reputation? "I don't care what people think, Mom. I care about doing my job." "Your job," she said bitterly. "That job we've supported all these years." "Supported?" I couldn't help laughing, but it came out harsh and bitter. "Mom, you spent 15 years telling people I work a dead-end government job. You've apologized for my career at every family gathering. You've compared me to Victoria like I was some kind of failure who needed to be explained away. That's not support, that's embarrassment. We never said you were a failure. You never said I was a success either." Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. "What do you want from us, Riley?" What did I want? For 15 years, I'd wanted recognition, respect, acknowledgement that my work mattered, that I'd built something meaningful, that I was more than the family disappointment who'd chosen the safe route. But now, sitting in my office with Damien's case file spread across my desk, I realized I didn't want anything from them anymore. I'd stopped needing their approval the moment I understood that their golden boy was a criminal and their family disappointment was the prosecutor who was going to bring him to justice. "I don't want anything from you, Mom. I want to do my job, the same job you've been dismissing for 15 years. Saturday morning, Uncle Raymond called to inform me that there would be a family meeting that afternoon at my parents' house. His tone was formal, almost businesslike, as if he was calling a board meeting instead of trying to organize an intervention. "Riley, we need to discuss this situation with Damien. The whole family will be there. We need to figure out a solution that works for everyone." A solution that works for everyone. Everyone except Margaret Thorne, David and Susan Chen, and the other 44 victims whose life savings had been stolen. "I don't think that's necessary, Uncle Raymond. This is a legal matter, not a family matter." "Everything is a family matter when it involves family, Riley. 2:00. Don't be late." He hung up before I could respond, probably assuming that his authority as the family patriarch would compel my attendance. For 15 years, it would have.
The old Riley would have shown up, endured whatever lectures and guilt trips they had planned, and tried to find some compromise that made everyone happy. But the old Riley hadn't been sitting across from Margaret Thorne, watching a dignified woman in her 70s explain how her grandson's friend had stolen her husband's life insurance money. The old Riley hadn't read text messages where her cousin laughed about robbing elderly people to pay for his gambling debts. I decided to go to the meeting, not to compromise or negotiate, but to make sure they understood exactly what was going to happen next. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 2 o'clock, parking behind a line of cars that represented the full family hierarchy. Uncle Raymond's Mercedes, Victoria's Lexus, Damien's BMW that would probably be repossessed within the month, and assorted vehicles belonging to cousins and relatives who normally only gathered for weddings and funerals. The living room was packed. My parents sat on the couch, looking shock-shelked. Victoria had claimed the armchair, her laptop open as if this was a business presentation. Aunt Veronica sat beside Damien, clutching his arm like she could physically protect him from prosecution. Uncle Raymond stood by the fireplace in what was clearly meant to be a position of authority. The conversation stopped the moment I walked in. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could feel the weight of their expectations, their assumptions, their absolute certainty that family loyalty would trump everything else. "Riley," Uncle Raymond began, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescending authority. "Thank you for coming. We need to resolve this misunderstanding about Damien's situation." Misunderstanding. They were still calling it a misunderstanding. "There's no misunderstanding, Uncle Raymond. Damien committed multiple felonies. He's going to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law." "Now, let's be reasonable," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Victoria has been researching these types of cases, and it seems like there are always alternatives to prosecution. Restitution programs, community service, professional counseling, ways to handle this that don't destroy a young man's future." Victoria nodded eagerly, consulting her laptop. "I found several cases where prosecutors accepted plea bargains that focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment, especially for first-time offenders from good families." First-time offenders, good families. They were still trying to reframe this as a minor mistake by someone who deserved special consideration. "Damien isn't a first-time offender," I said calmly. "This fraud went on for over 3 years, and the victims deserve more than rehabilitation. They deserve justice." "But surely you can show some discretion," my father interjected. "You're the prosecutor. You must have some flexibility in how you handle cases." Discretion. Flexibility. Code words for bend the rules because he's family. Damien himself had been silent through this exchange, but now he finally spoke up. "Riley, I know I made some mistakes, but I never meant to hurt anyone. If there's a way to make this right without destroying my entire life..." Some mistakes. 47 counts of fraud, $10 million stolen, and he's calling it some mistakes? Damien.
He looked confused. Who? Margaret Thorne, 73 years old. Her husband, Robert, died 3 years ago. You convinced her to invest her entire pension in your fake investment program. $400,000, everything she had. I don't remember specific clients. You should remember her. You sent a text message to your girlfriend joking about how these old people had more money than they knew what to do with. You said you were practically doing them a favor. The room went dead silent. Damien's face had gone white. Do you remember David and Susan Chen? Retired teachers, 82 and 79 years old. $600,000, their entire retirement savings. They're living with their daughter now because you stole everything they'd saved over 35 years of teaching. Riley, that's enough, Aunt Veronica said sharply. You're being cruel. Cruel? I was being cruel by naming his victims? No, Aunt Veronica, cruel is what Damien did to those people. Cruel is laughing about stealing from elderly people to pay for trips to Vegas. Cruel is targeting widows and retirees because they're vulnerable and trusting. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved screenshots of Damien's messages. Would you like me to read some of his text messages? The ones where he brags about how easy it is to fool old people? The ones where he calls his victims greedy idiots who deserve what they get? Stop, Damien said quietly. Please stop. Why? Because it's embarrassing? Because it makes you look bad in front of the family? I kept going, reading from my phone. Quote, Mrs. Peterson called again, asking about her investment performance. I told her the market was volatile, but her money was safe. If she only knew it paid for my weekend in Vegas. I looked up at the horrified faces around me. That's your son, Aunt Veronica. That's your golden boy. Uncle Raymond tried to regain control of the meeting. Riley, we understand you're upset, but destroying Damien's life won't bring back any of the money. What we need to focus on is finding a solution that helps everyone. I have a solution. It's called prosecution. It's called justice. It's called sending a message that stealing from elderly people has consequences. You can't be serious, Victoria said, snapping her laptop shut. Riley, this is family. Family protects family. That's how it works. Family protects family. The mantra they'd lived by for years, except for when it came to protecting my feelings, my career, my sense of worth. Really, Victoria, family protects family? Is that why you've spent 15 years apologizing for my career choice? Is that why you told people I was stuck in a dead-end job with no room for advancement? Is that why you worried about me out loud at every family gathering? Her face flushed red. That's different. We were concerned about you. You were embarrassed by me. There's a difference. I stood up, looking around the room at all their shocked faces. For 15 years, these people had treated me like the family charity case. The one who'd made safe choices, who lacked ambition, who needed their pity and condescension. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and clear. Damien is going to be prosecuted for 47 counts of fraud. He's going to be convicted, and he's going to go to prison. Not because I'm cruel or vindictive, but because that's what happens when you steal $10 million from elderly people. Riley, please, my mother begged. He's your cousin, your blood. And Margaret Thorne is someone's mother. David and Susan Chen are someone's parents. They matter too. I headed toward the door, but Uncle Raymond's voice stopped me. If you do this, Riley, you're out of this family. Do you understand that? You prosecute Damien, and you are no longer welcome at family gatherings, no more holidays, no more birthdays, no more anything. You'll be dead to us. I turned around slowly. Uncle Raymond was standing by the fireplace, his face red with anger, pointing at me like I was a disobedient child who needed to be punished. Dead to them. For 15 years, I'd felt like I was barely alive to them anyway. Uncle Raymond, I said quietly, you can't fire me from a family that never really accepted me in the first place. The family meeting ended with Uncle Raymond's ultimatum hanging in the air like smoke. As I walked to my car, I could hear raised voices through the windows, arguments about what to do next, accusations about who was to blame for the situation, desperate planning sessions about how to save Damien. But I wasn't their problem anymore. I was their nightmare. Monday morning, I called Detective Pearson to my office again. Olivia, I need you to re-examine the Rivers case. I want to make sure we haven't missed anything. She raised an eyebrow. Boss, that case is already airtight. We've got him on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and running an unlicensed investment scheme. His own communications are damning. What are you looking for? I'm looking for more victims. Damien operated the scheme for over 3 years, and I don't think we've found everyone he robbed. You think there are more? I know there are more.
Run the name Damien Rivers through every senior center, church group, and retirement community in a 50-mile radius. Check social media posts, local newspaper archives, anywhere he might have given presentations or seminars. This wasn't random. He was hunting these people systematically. Olivia nodded grimly. I'll get right on it. By Wednesday, she was back in my office with a file that had grown disturbingly thick. You were right, she said, spreading new documents across my desk. We found 12 more victims, all elderly, all targeted through community groups or church events. Total additional losses, $3.2 million.
There's something else, Olivia continued. We found evidence that he was planning to flee. Airline tickets to Grand Cayman purchased 2 weeks before his arrest, hotel reservations, and this. She handed me a bank statement. Account at First National Bank of Grand Cayman. Looks like he was already moving money offshore. He'd been planning to run. Not just from the law, but from his victims, from his responsibilities, from the consequences of 3 years of systematic theft. If the FBI hadn't moved when they did, Damien would have disappeared with whatever money he hadn't already gambled away or spent on his luxury lifestyle. Olivia, I want you to contact the district attorneys in neighboring counties. Share everything we have on Rivers. I want to make sure there aren't victims in other jurisdictions we don't know about yet. She nodded and gathered up the files. Boss, can I ask you something? Of course. This guy, he's related to you, right? The family connection that everyone's been whispering about? I'd been wondering when someone would ask directly. He's my cousin. That must be tough. I thought about Margaret Thorne, sitting in my office explaining how her grandson's friend had stolen her husband's life insurance money. I thought about David and Susan Chen, living in their granddaughter's bedroom because they couldn't afford rent. It's tough for his victims, I said. Not for me. Thursday morning, my assistant knocked on my door with an expression that meant trouble. Riley, Channel 7 News is on line 1. They want to comment about the Rivers prosecution. The media had found the story. Or, more likely, someone in my family had fed it to them, hoping public pressure would force me to back down. I took the call. District Attorney Hartwell, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7. We understand you're prosecuting a family member for financial fraud. Can you comment on the potential conflict of interest? A conflict of interest. As if prosecuting a criminal was somehow compromised by the fact that he shared my DNA. I can confirm that Damien Rivers has been charged with multiple counts of financial fraud. The charges are based on evidence, not family relationships. But surely the fact that he's your cousin creates some ethical complications? The only ethical complication would be if I failed to prosecute crimes because of personal relationships. Justice doesn't depend on family connections. Some people are saying this is a case of prosecutorial overreach, that family loyalty should have influenced your decision to recuse yourself. Some people. I wondered which family members had been talking to reporters. Miss Walsh, Mr. Rivers is accused of stealing over $13 million from 59 victims, most of them elderly retirees. Would you suggest those victims deserve less justice because the prosecutor happens to be related to the defendant? She didn't have an answer for that. By Friday morning, the story had exploded across local media. DA prosecutes own cousin. Family feud in the courthouse. When justice comes home. The headlines were sensational, but the coverage was surprisingly favorable. Most reporters focused on the victim stories, the scope of the fraud, and the courage it took for a prosecutor to put justice ahead of family loyalty. But my family saw it differently. Uncle Raymond called Friday afternoon, his voice shaking with rage. Riley, you've destroyed this family. Do you see what you've done? It's all over the news. Everyone in town is talking about us. Everyone in town was talking about them.
Not about the victims, not about the crimes, but about how the family looked in the media. Uncle Raymond, maybe they're talking about the fact that Damien stole $13 million from elderly people. That's not the point. The point is that you've made us all look like criminals. Damien made himself look like a criminal. I'm just making sure he faces consequences. This ends now, Riley. You recuse yourself from this case, or we're done. Forever. Forever. The same word they'd used when they didn't invite me to family events, when they forgot to include me in holiday plans, when they acted like I barely existed unless they needed something. Uncle Raymond, I said quietly, I don't think you understand what forever means to someone you've been ignoring for 15 years. I hung up on him and sat back in my chair. Outside my office window, Millbrook was going about its normal Friday evening business. People heading home from work, kids playing in the park across from the courthouse, elderly couples walking their dogs. Some of those elderly people were Damien's victims. Some of them were probably still afraid to trust anyone with their money, still wondering if they'd made the right decisions, still questioning their own judgment because someone they'd trusted had betrayed them so completely. That's when I made my final decision about how this case was going to proceed. Not just as a prosecutor seeking justice, but as someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, and betrayed by people who were supposed to care about you. Damien thought he was above consequences because he was family. My family thought they could pressure me into protecting him because blood was thicker than justice. They were both about to learn how wrong they were. Monday morning, I was going to file additional charges against Damien Rivers, not just for the original crimes, but for every new victim we'd discovered, every piece of evidence that showed premeditation, every indication that he'd been planning to flee the country with his victims' money. And when my family called to beg, threaten, or guilt me into backing down, I was going to do something I should have done years ago. I was going to hang up on them. Monday morning.
Today was the day I would file the expanded charges against Damien Rivers. Not just the original 47 counts of fraud, but 63 additional charges covering the 12 new victims we'd discovered, conspiracy to commit money laundering, attempted flight to avoid prosecution, and operating a criminal enterprise. My assistant district attorney, Marcus, walked in with coffee and a grim smile. Ready to make legal history, boss? Ready to make sure justice is served. The expanded indictment was devastating. $13.4 million in total losses, 59 victims, ranging in age from 62 to 87. Evidence of systematic targeting of vulnerable elderly people through religious and community organizations, plans to flee the country with stolen funds, and most damning of all, recorded communications showing Damien's complete lack of remorse for destroying people's lives. At 9 a.m. sharp, I held a press conference on the courthouse steps. The gathered reporters represented every major news outlet in the region, and I could see news vans stretching down the street. This case had captured public attention in a way that went far beyond local interest. Today, my office is filing expanded charges against Damien Rivers for what we believe to be the largest elder fraud case in this county's history, I began, my voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Mr. Rivers systematically targeted elderly victims, stealing their life savings through elaborate lies and false promises. A reporter from the front row raised her hand. District Attorney Hartwell, how do you respond to critics who say prosecuting your own cousin represents a conflict of interest? I'd been expecting this question for weeks, and I'd prepared an answer that went to the heart of everything I'd learned about justice, family, and what it meant to serve the public good. The only conflict of interest would be if I allowed personal relationships to prevent me from prosecuting crimes against vulnerable members of our community. The victims in this case deserve justice regardless of their attackers' family connections. That's not a conflict, that's the job. Another reporter shouted from the back,
What's your response to family members who've publicly criticized your decision to prosecute? My response is that I work for the people of Millbrook County, not for my extended family. My obligation is to protect victims, not to protect criminals from consequences. As I spoke those words, I felt something shift inside me. For 15 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disapproval, their constant suggestions that I wasn't ambitious enough, successful enough, important enough. But standing on those courthouse steps, surrounded by journalists who were treating me as a serious professional, defending a decision that would protect vulnerable people from predators, I finally understood something crucial. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had something better. I had purpose. The weeks leading up to Damien's trial were unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. Usually, high-profile cases involved distant defendants, strangers whose crimes had shocked the community but hadn't touched my personal life. This was different. Every piece of evidence, every witness interview, every legal strategy session was shadowed by the knowledge that I was building a case against someone who'd sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner just 10 months earlier. But what surprised me was how little that family connection affected my professional judgment. If anything, knowing Damien personally made me more determined to see justice served. I'd watched him charm elderly church members at family events, seen him present himself as trustworthy and reliable. I knew how convincing he could be, how easily he could manipulate people who wanted to believe in his promises. The victim impact statements began arriving in late November. 59 letters from people whose lives had been shattered by someone they'd trusted. Margaret Thorne's letter was handwritten on cream-colored stationery, her careful cursive telling the story of how she'd gone from comfortable widow to someone who couldn't afford her heart medication. Dear District Attorney Hartwell, I want you to know that this isn't just about money for me. At my age, I won't live long enough to rebuild what I've lost, but I might live long enough to see justice served. That matters more than you can know. David and Susan Chen's letter came typed on their daughter's computer, explaining how they'd moved from independence to dependence overnight. We taught school for 35 years. We believed in honesty, hard work, and treating people fairly. To learn that someone could look us in the eye and lie so completely, it's changed how we see the world. But knowing that there are people like you who will fight for justice even when it's difficult gives us hope. Each letter reinforced my conviction that this prosecution was about more than family dynamics or personal grudges. This was about protecting a vulnerable population from predators who saw their trust as weakness and their savings as opportunity. 2 weeks before the trial, my family made their final attempt to change my mind. But this time, they didn't rely on phone calls or guilt trips. They hired a lawyer. Attorney Harold Blackstone called my office on a Tuesday morning, his voice carrying the kind of smooth authority that expensive legal representation provides. District Attorney Hartwell, I represent the Rivers family in connection with the prosecution of Damien Rivers. I'd like to discuss the possibility of a plea arrangement that would serve everyone's interests.
Full restitution. I almost laughed. Mr. Blackstone, are you telling me your clients have $13.4 million available for restitution? A pause. Well, not immediately available, but with payment plans, asset liquidation, family contributions. How long would this payment plan take? Another pause. Longer this time. We're thinking somewhere in the range of 20 to 25 years? 25 years. Margaret Thorne was 73 years old. David and Susan Chen were in their 80s. Half the victims wouldn't live to see full restitution under a 25-year payment plan. Mr. Blackstone, I appreciate your family's concern for their relative, but 59 elderly victims can't wait 25 years for justice. This case is going to trial. District Attorney Hartwell, I hope you'll reconsider. Prosecuting family members is,
Well, it's unprecedented in this county. It sends a troubling message about prosecutorial priorities. Prosecutorial priorities. There was the real heart of their objection. Not that Damien was innocent, not that the evidence was weak, but that family relationships should trump legal obligations. Mr. Blackstone, my prosecutorial priority is protecting vulnerable members of this community from predators. That priority doesn't change based on DNA. I hung up and immediately called Marcus into my office. They just tried to buy Damien out of prison, I told him. 25-year payment plan for full restitution. Marcus whistled low. Do they actually have $13 million? Of course not. They're hoping we'll accept a promise instead of a prosecution. What did you tell them? I told them we'll see them in court. The trial of People versus Damien Rivers began on a cold Monday in January. The courthouse was packed with victims, family members, reporters, and curious members of the public who'd been following the case through months of media coverage. I'd prosecuted hundreds of cases over my 15-year career, but walking into that courtroom felt different. This wasn't just about legal procedures and evidence presentation. This was about proving that justice could exist independent of personal relationships, that the law applied equally to everyone, regardless of family connections or social status. Damien sat at the defendant's table wearing a navy blue suit I recognized from family gatherings. His attorney, public defender Janet Morrison, had done her best with an essentially hopeless case. When your client has documented their crimes in text messages and emails, when 59 victims are prepared to testify, when financial records show exactly where every stolen dollar went, defense options are limited. My opening statement was straightforward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust, about elderly people who worked their entire lives to build modest retirement savings, and about a defendant who saw that trust as an opportunity for theft. I walked them through the evidence methodically. The fake investment company, the promised returns that never materialized, the systematic targeting of vulnerable elderly people through churches and community centers, the lavish lifestyle funded by other people's life savings. But the most powerful testimony came from the victims themselves. Margaret Thorne took the stand wearing the same careful outfit she'd worn to my office months earlier. In a clear, steady voice, she described how Damien had convinced her to invest her late husband's life insurance money. He seemed so trustworthy. He talked about his family, showed me pictures from family gatherings. He said his grandmother had taught him about the importance of helping seniors protect their savings. The irony was devastating. Damien had used our family's reputation for respectability as a tool to rob elderly people. David Chen's testimony was equally compelling. Despite his 82 years, his voice was strong and clear as he described the moment he realized his life savings were gone. We gave him everything because we believed him when he said our money would be safe. When you're our age, you can't start over. What's stolen from you is stolen forever. The defense's strategy was predictable. Damien was in over his head. He'd made mistakes but hadn't intended to hurt anyone. He was a good person who'd made bad decisions under pressure. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Text messages where Damien laughed about stupid old people who trusted him with their money. Financial records showing millions of dollars flowing from victim accounts to fund his gambling addiction. Evidence of the planned flight to Grand Cayman with whatever money he hadn't already stolen. On the third day of trial, something unexpected happened. My mother appeared in the courtroom gallery, sitting in the back row with her hands folded in her lap. She didn't make eye contact with me, didn't acknowledge my presence, just sat quietly through an entire day of testimony about her nephew's crimes. After court adjourned, I found her waiting by my car in the parking garage. She said, "Riley," something quietly. "I need to tell you something." "Mom, if this is another attempt to convince me to drop the charges..." "It's not." She looked older than I remembered, worn down by months of family crisis and public scrutiny. "I came to apologize." I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. Apologize for what? For not seeing you clearly. For not understanding what you'd accomplished. For treating your career like it was something to be embarrassed about instead of something to be proud of. She gestured toward the courthouse behind us. I sat in there today and watched you prosecute a case that's going to protect vulnerable people from predators. I watched you stand up for victims who couldn't protect themselves, and I realized that everything we thought about success and failure was backwards. Mom,
The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered verdicts on 63 separate counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Guilty on all counts. Damien's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Under state guidelines, he was looking at 25 to 30 years in prison. At 32 years old, he would be in his late 50s before he was eligible for parole. The local media coverage was extensive, but it had evolved from sensational family drama to serious reporting about elder fraud and the importance of prosecutorial independence. Editorial writers praised the conviction as evidence that the justice system could work impartially, regardless of personal relationships. But the response that mattered most to me came from the victims themselves. Margaret Thorne sent a handwritten thank you note on the same cream-colored stationery she'd used for her victim impact statement. "Dear District Attorney Hartwell," she wrote, "I know this couldn't have been easy for you, but you chose justice over family loyalty, and that choice has given all of us something precious, the knowledge that there are still people in positions of power who will do the right thing even when it costs them personally." David and Susan Shen visited my office the day after the sentencing to thank me in person. "We know you lost your family over this," David said, "but you gave us something back, faith that justice still exists." 6 months after Damien's conviction, I was offered a position with the State Attorney General's office in the Capitol. It was a significant promotion. Senior prosecutor specializing in financial crimes with statewide jurisdiction and a substantial salary increase. I turned it down. Instead, I used the visibility from the Rivers case to launch a new initiative in Millbrook County, the Elder Protection Unit, a specialized division focused on investigating and prosecuting crimes against senior citizens. We partnered with local senior centers, churches, and community organizations to provide education about financial scams and create reporting mechanisms for suspicious activities. Margaret Thorne became one of our first volunteer advocates, speaking at senior centers about her experience and helping other elderly people recognize the warning signs of investment fraud. "I lost my money," she would tell audiences, "but I don't want to lose my purpose. If my story can prevent one other person from being victimized, then something good will have come from something terrible." The Elder Protection Unit investigated 43 cases in its first year, recovering over $2 million in stolen funds and securing convictions against 7 different financial predators. It became a model program that other counties began adopting across the state. My relationship with my family never fully recovered, but it evolved into something more honest and sustainable. Uncle Raymond and Aunt Veronica refused to speak to me after Damien's conviction. Several cousins and extended family members took sides, creating fractures that would probably never heal completely. But my immediate family, my parents and Victoria, began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on different terms. Victoria was the first to acknowledge what had really happened during those 15 years of family gatherings. We were so focused on conventional success that we couldn't see actual success, she admitted during one of our careful coffee meetings 6 months after the trial. "I spent years pitying you for having a boring job, never realizing you were building something meaningful." My father took longer to come around, but eventually he too began to understand the magnitude of what I had accomplished. Not just in prosecuting Damien, but in building a career that protected vulnerable people and served the public good. "I always thought success meant making money," he told me, during a family dinner that felt nothing like the ones from my childhood. "I never considered that success might mean making a difference."
We were never going to be the close-knit family we'd pretended to be during those holiday gatherings. Too much had been said, too many wounds had been opened, too many illusions had been shattered. But we found a way to be honest with each other, which was something we'd never managed before. 3 years after Damien's conviction, I ran for re-election as district attorney and won with 87% of the vote. The Rivers case had established my reputation as a prosecutor who prioritized justice over personal considerations, and voters responded to that kind of integrity. Margaret Thorne died peacefully in her sleep 2 years after the trial. She was 85 years old, and while she never recovered financially from Damien's theft, she spent her final years knowing that her case had led to systemic changes that would protect other elderly people from similar crimes.
At her funeral, her daughter approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mom always said you gave her something more valuable than money," she said. "You gave her faith that good people still existed in positions of power." The Elder Protection Unit continued to grow and evolve, becoming a permanent part of the prosecutor's office and expanding its mission to include all forms of crimes against vulnerable adults. By the 5-year mark, we'd recovered over $15 million in stolen funds and prevented countless additional victims from being targeted by financial predators. But the most significant change wasn't professional. It was personal. For 15 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's disappointment, their constant suggestions that I'd chosen the safe route, that I lacked ambition, that I was settling for less than I could achieve. The Rivers case taught me that they were wrong about almost everything. Safe routes don't require prosecuting your own cousin. Lack of ambition doesn't drive someone to build specialized units that protect vulnerable populations. Settling for less doesn't mean choosing justice over family loyalty when the cost is being ostracized from people you love. I hadn't chosen the safe route. I'd chosen the right route. And sometimes, when you choose what's right over what's easy, you discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined. On quiet Sunday mornings, when I review case files in my home office, I sometimes think about that Thanksgiving dinner where Victoria announced her promotion while everyone dismissed my little courthouse job. I think about the condescending pat on the hand, the pitying looks, the casual assumption that I'd failed to make something of myself. They were wrong about success, wrong about failure, and wrong about me. But they were right about one thing. I had made something of myself. I'd made myself into someone who could look power in the eye and choose justice. Someone who could lose a family to save 59 families. Someone who understood that real success isn't measured in corner offices or international travel, but in the lives you protect and the difference you make. That Thanksgiving dinner felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who sat quietly while her family mocked her career was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and didn't need anyone else's permission to use her power for good. And when I think about Margaret Thorne's handwritten thank you note, still framed on my office wall, I know that every sacrifice was worth it. Because sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything you thought you wanted, and gives you everything you actually needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.